Hi and welcome back to the channel. It's time for part 2 of my look at 1980s cult science fiction movies. "1983's Brainstorm was a nightmare to make and almost became a lost film before it ever found an audience. It's the story of a breakthrough technology that allows for the recording and transmission of the total of human experience: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, emotions, and knowledge. And it's also about the ways, both good and bad, such a technology can be applied. For my money, this is one of the most interesting science fiction movies of the 1980s. Christopher Walken plays Michael Brace, a scientist who, with his work partner and mentor Lillian Reynolds, played by Louise Fletcher, has created the technology. His estranged wife Karen, an industrial designer played by Natalie Wood, is finalising their separation as Michael and Lillian make the breakthrough. The owner of the corporation for which they all work, Alex Turson, played by Cliff Robertson, has his own plans for the technology. When Natalie Wood died during a break in filming Brainstorm, the studio involved, MGM, wanted to shelve the movie and collect the insurance money or else sell it off to some other studio cheaply to get some money back. Douglas Trumbull completed all but a few pickup scenes, and he really pushed them to complete and release the film. They only agreed to this when other studios started going into a bidding war for the rights to own the film. Brainstorm works so well because it shows both sides of this nameless breakthrough technology. It shows how the technology heals Michael and Karen's marriage by letting them see the world and their relationship through each other's eyes. It allows people to experience things they could never physically do. It also shows the darker side of the technology, particularly with their friend Hal, who uses the technology for a sad and disturbing suicide attempt. And of course, the military wants to weaponize it and make it an instrument of torture. But the most valuable player here is Louise Fletcher's Lillian. Her grounded humanity and the finesse of her acting, particularly in her final scenes, take this film beyond the ordinary for the science fiction genre. Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood are both great and they have a fine chemistry in their roles, but it's the evocation of the technology, where the image of the movie changes from 35mm at 1.7:1 aspect ratio to Super Panavision 70 with an aspect ratio of 2.2:1 that really impressed me. Originally, Trumbull wanted to use his new show scan system, which was a 70mm, 60 frames per second film process, but refitting cinemas with the projectors was too expensive. For me, Brainstorm works. The hard work of a scientific breakthrough is clearly evoked, the human dimensions of the situation are in the foreground, and all of the characters feel lived in. It's science fiction for grown-ups, made at a time when an infantilized version of science fiction was all that studios really cared about. Based on a novel by D.G. Compton, this is a slow, thoughtful movie that foreshadows the excess of reality television while also reflecting on how we see and how we deal with death. In a near-future world where dying of illness is extremely rare, a woman, Catherine Mortenhoe, played by Romy Schneider, is told that she has an incurable disease. Vincent, a television executive played by Harry Dean Stanton, offers her $500,000 to become the focus of a reality TV show called Death Watch. In fact, Vincent and the network NTV has already begun an advertising program on billboards before she ever signs. Catherine is a fierce and independent woman and she negotiates hard. She gets the money for her boyfriend and then runs away. But Vincent has a cameraman who can follow through with the program, a guy called Roddy, played by Harvey Keitel, who has cameras and transmitters implanted behind his eyes. Everything he sees is sent to NTV. Roddy takes drugs to never sleep because the implants will fail if he's in total darkness for a brief period of time, and he will become irreparably blind. Roddy befriends Catherine as they travel across Glasgow and eventually to Land's End, where her ex-husband Gerald, played by Max von Sydow, lives. As they journey across the UK, NTV broadcasts Catherine's experiences as seen and heard by Roddy. This movie gives us an interestingly textured world of political strife, bartering markets, homeless people, and privilege. Churches are turned into homeless shelters in a cruel and very limited way, and we get a population who is addicted to grief porn because they never experience unexpected death in their daily lives. The cast here is good. Schneider as the central character is one of the strongest female characters in 1980s science fiction. Her determination and her resolute nature resonate well to modern audiences. Harvey Keitel, playing a more vulnerable character than we know him for, is fine as Roddy, and Harry Dean Stanton's Vincent is a suitably odious arsehole. Max von Sydow does a lot with a small role at the end of the film. The director Bertrand Tavernier, if you haven't seen his movie Round Midnight, you really should. Death Watch is an intelligent science fiction movie that you need to lean toward to fully appreciate. It does really interesting world building and it has something to say. You should check it out. The 1980s was the peak decade of post-apocalyptic action comedy. This one has a pair of sisters, Reggie and Sam, played by Catherine Mary Stewart and Kelly Maroney, who survive Earth's transit through the tail of a comet, which turns most people into red dust, and some people into murderous but intelligent zombies who will eventually become red dust. Aided by a truck driver called Hector, played by Robert Beltran, the sisters search for other people and do some shopping, which doesn't end well as a Lord of the Flies group of former stock boys have taken over the shopping mall. Add to that a team of scientists in a bunker who are looking for a cure even as the comet dust is affecting them, and those scientists include cult favourites Mary Warrenoff and Jeffrey Lewis. Add to that Cyndi Lauper singing Girls Just Want to Have Fun on the soundtrack, and you've got an almost perfect 1980s popcorn munching fun movie. Shot on a $700,000 budget, it made $14 million at the box office, and rightly so. It balances horror, comedy, action, and deconstructing the Valley Girl meme of the 1980s by making the two protagonists competent weapons-trained fighters because their dad was a Green Beret. Night of the Comet is also sex-positive without being prurient. It gives us a Los Angeles emptier than Charlton Heston's one in The Omega Man, with a red-tinged apocalyptic sky, and an infectious optimism that still plays well today. If you saw Night of the Comet in the 80s, you'll remember it fondly. If you haven't, it may be time to take a look at it. I first saw this movie when it came out on VHS, and I rewatched it for the first time since then today. Both times I had the same thought. What the hell did I just watch? This British science fiction, surreal horror, whatever the hell the movie is weirdly fascinating. A man is abducted by aliens while his young son watches. He suddenly appears 3 years later, and weird, really weird things start to happen. There are a lot of things I could say that would spoil this movie, like how the guy returns to Earth or what happens to the son's pet snake. But there are also a lot of things that I don't really understand about it as well. Why there's a gratuitous nude scene featuring Mariam Darbo, apart from the fact that it was a 1980s movie. Why there's a clown in this movie. Why they decided to do an alien abduction movie that's a metaphor for toxic masculinity and bad parenting. What the aliens actually want. And what the whole thing with the eggs in the bathtub is. I haven't seen the two sequels to this movie, which might answer some of the questions. But I just checked and the sequels have almost nothing to do with the first film apart from the titles. But in spite of the craziness of Extra, there's a subtext here of forces beyond their control totally destroying a family. It's well produced and the practical special effects are suitably gummy, gory, gushy and yucky. And best of all, it's got originality. I've seen many bigger budget science fiction movies that have worse special effects and nowhere near the imagination of Extra. If you haven't seen it, it's worth checking out. From what I understand, from what I could see from the reviews, you might not want to look at the sequels. Mary Warrenoff is an interesting cult movie actress. When most of her contemporaries were known for their sexiness, Ms. Warrenoff played up her toughness. She started out in the early 60s as part of Andy Warhol's Factory, appearing in the underground films they churned out like Chelsea Girls and a movie called Since, where she played John F. Kennedy. But people know her for the 1970s when she started appearing in cult B movies. She was in Oliver Stone's directorial debut Seizure. She was in 4 movies directed by her friend Paul Bartel: Death Race 2000, Cannonball, Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, and Eating Raoul. She was also in Rock and Roll High School, and a movie which is getting an upcoming and belated Blu-ray release, my all-time favourite New Year's Eve movie, Alan Arkush's Get Crazy. Warrenoff's been a unique character in cinema, a tall, no-nonsense woman who took no shit from anyone, and even when she was playing against type, as she did in Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, it was always fun to watch her on the screen. She did her share of stinker movies like Angel of Heat with Marilyn Chambers, but she never came out of these movies covered in shit. She always seemed to cruise through and then move on to the next project. There has never been a movie in which Mary Woronov appeared where the movie was diminished by her presence in it. She always added something weird and wonderful to the movies in which she appeared. Thank you very much for watching. By the way, I'm doing a live stream tomorrow for 2 hours, starting at 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, where I'm going to be doing some of the recent purchases and hauls that I've got, and talking about a few other things and just kind of responding to the chat. Anyway, take care of yourselves. Watch some good movies. Watch some bad movies. Watch some 1980s science fiction movies and eat popcorn and drink beer. And I'll catch you next time.